Hey there, welcome. I am so excited about today's book spotlight for Black History Month. I am going to be reading about a singer who is pretty amazing, and it is all about Nina Simone. So this is a relatively new book that's been recently released, and it really tells this amazing story about Nina Simone. Now, I've heard her music and I've heard about her, but one thing I didn't realize that she actually developed her talent for music at a super early age. Okay. They talk about her being 3 years old and going with her mother and playing the piano when her mother was going to preach. That is pretty genius. It's just amazing just to think about the talent that she had. And this is an individual that used her talent and her platform and her voice to make a difference and to allow other people to be heard. So I don't want to talk too much. I want to get right into this story so we can learn something more about Nina Simone. Nina, a story of Nina Simone. Words by Traci and Todd. Pictures by Christian Robinson. Eunice Kathleen Wayman came into this world on February 21st, 1933, in the small town of Tryon, North Carolina. She wasn't the first Wayman child, or the last, but she was the only one who sang before she could talk, and found rhythm before she could walk. The only one with music on the inside. There was music on the outside, too. Mama was forever singing church songs as she baked the biscuits and stirred the beans, and Daddy played the small upright piano. Sometimes when Mama was away, Daddy sat Eunice on his knee and put her fingers atop his as he played his favorite good time jazz. Eunice learned so quickly. It wasn't long before Daddy was lounging on the porch listening to Eunice play all on her own. Then suddenly, Daddy would whistle, "Quick, Mama's coming!" and Eunice would slip into Mama's favorite hymn without missing a note. Mama was a minister and thought jazz was unholy music. She preached all day Sunday and sometimes Wednesday in proper churches and backwoods shacks. When Eunice was 3, Mama brought her along to play the music of the Lord. She played softly at first, letting Mama warm her flock. As Mama's power grew, Eunice matched her rhythm, rolling until at last the congregation was on its feet, overcome by the message and the music. When she wasn't preaching, Mama worked as Mrs. Miller's maid. She didn't love the job, but she had many mouths to feed and not a lot of choices. To pass the hours, she liked to tell Mrs. Miller how talented Eunice was. When at last Mrs. Miller heard Eunice play, she knew the little girl had a gift. So she introduced Eunice to her friend, a piano teacher named Muriel Mizanovich. The next Saturday, Eunice walked 3 miles to Miss Mazzy's house. It was deep in the woods and a world away. There were lemon drops, sunlight in the ceiling, and a shiny grand piano. Miss Mazzy taught Eunice to curl her fingers, straighten her back, and play concertos and fugues. Classical music, Miss Mazzy called it, written long ago for kings and queens. The music of Johann Sebastian Bach was Eunice's favorite. She liked the way it started softly, then tumbled to thunder, like Mama's preaching. After her lessons, Eunice walked to Mrs. Miller's house. While she waited for Mama to finish cleaning, Eunice played with David, Mrs. Miller's son. Sometimes, when Mrs. Miller drove Mama home at the end of the day, David came over so he and Eunice could spend more time together. One day, David did not come to play, and the next time Eunice visited, Mrs. Miller led her son away. She had decided that it wouldn't do for David to play with a little black girl. There was nothing to be done. To help pay for Eunice's piano lessons, Miss Mazzy and Mrs. Miller spread the word about her talent. They collected money in church and wrote about Eunice in the local paper. Soon, people came to recognize Eunice on the street. When black folks saw her, they smiled with pride. It made her feel warm and good. When white folks saw Eunice, they pointed and said, "That's Miss Mazzie's colored girl," which did not feel good at all. The only other times white folks seemed to notice her was when they didn't want her around. It was another thing Eunice didn't understand. Another hurt she pushed down deep. One spring Sunday, as a thank you to all the people who supported her, Eunice gave a concert at the Traci Library. Daddy and Mama sat up front so they could watch her hands as she played. Eunice was ready to begin when a man made her parents stand so a white couple could sit. Then the man led her parents away. Eunice waited. Are Daddy and Mama coming back? The audience grew restless. Eunice was still. A wave of anger rolled toward her, but she hardly felt it. At last, the white couple stood, and Daddy and Mama returned to their front row seats. Some white people laughed as their anger cooled, but as Eunice looked at her parents' bowed heads, her anger was just getting warm. After high school, Eunice left Miss Mazzie in North Carolina for the Juilliard School of Music in New York City. She lived on 145th Street in Harlem. It was fast and loud and full of good-smelling food. The people were so elegant and fine. Eunice wore her best dress every day just to keep up. Eunice had a plan. If she worked hard at Juilliard, in a year she would be good enough for the real prize, the famous Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. Eunice was so sure of her plan that her whole family moved to Philly before she even auditioned. On the day of her audition, Eunice played each piece of music from memory. She was flawless. But it wasn't enough. The Curtis Institute turned her away. Days later, Eunice heard from her brother, who heard from their uncle, who heard from his Philadelphia friends, that the Curtis Institute had rejected Eunice because she was black. Eunice didn't know if the rumor was true, but it felt true. That old familiar anger and hurt came rushing back, and for the first time, Eunice wondered whether being black meant an end to all of her dreams. Eunice gave up music. She worked in a photography studio and didn't play a single note, but the music inside her couldn't be ignored. She became a piano teacher, and her students told her about New Jersey bars that hired piano players in the summer. She decided to see for herself and found her way to a rough Atlantic City club. The piano was shoved in a corner under an umbrella to protect it from a leak. Eunice took the job. The first night, Eunice wore a delicate dress and walked in like a queen. She opened with a Bach concerto, but this was not a Bach-friendly crowd. So Eunice played the popular songs of the day, sneaking in some Bach where she could. When she got more confident, she mixed in some of Daddy's good time jazz, and now and then took the bar to church. And then she sang, in a voice that was rich, sweet, and like soft thunder. Eunice played until the sun rose. When she was thirsty, she ordered some milk. If the crowd was too loud, Eunice stopped playing, sipped her milk, and waited for quiet. She could wait all night if she had to. The milk was free. Each night, there were more people in the bar than the night before. They couldn't get enough. But this was unholy music in an unholy place, and Eunice knew Mama wouldn't approve. To keep her secret safe, she changed her name to Nina Simone. The next year, Nina played clubs all over Atlantic City and Philadelphia. She added a new song, a Bill Holiday hit about a man named Porgy and a woman named Bess. Billy sang it sad and blue, but Nina made it dark and deep. She put it on a record, and people loved it. Miss Simone had arrived. But while Nina sang of love, something else stirred in the streets of Philadelphia. A low rumble of anger and fear. The sound of black people rising, unwilling to accept being treated as less than human. It was part of a larger chorus that could be heard in New York, Chicago, and all throughout the South. Nina heard it. Underneath the applause and growing praise, Nina heard the steady roar of unrest. Her friends, great writers and thinkers, wanted her to add her voice. She was famous now, and people would listen. But fame was still new to Nina. She worked so hard to keep that spotlight lit, and she was exhausted. How could she join a movement when she could hardly move? In 1963, Nina's hard work paid off. She was the main attraction at Carnegie Hall, that spectacular New York theater every musician hoped to play. Miss Mazzy came to see Nina's name in lights. Daddy came too. Even Mama was there, sitting close enough to see Nina's hands. Nina played 18 songs. At the sound of the last note, the audience was on its feet, clapping, cheering, shouting for more. It was the stuff of dreams. Except, hundreds of miles away, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sat in a Birmingham jail. He had marched the streets of that Alabama city demanding respect and dignity. Instead, he and his followers were hosed, beaten, and arrested. And that steady rising roar grew louder, faster, until at last it became the anguished beat of a single drum. It sounded on June 12, 1963, when Medgar Evers, who demanded justice for black people, was killed in Jackson, Mississippi, by a white man. When Medgar's killer stood trial, the governor of Mississippi shook his hand. The drums sounded again on September 15th when a black church was bombed in Birmingham, and Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Carol Denise McNair were killed. Nina's own little girl had just turned 1 year old. The drum beat was relentless, demanding. Its steady rhythm tugged at the hurt Nina had tucked away for so long and set it free. Nina pushed all of it into a raging storm of song. She called out Alabama and Mississippi by name. Her lyrics were so fed up and true, they couldn't be spoken in polite company. But Nina was done being polite. As far as she could tell, politeness had gotten her people nothing. Nina's voice broke with the weight of this new music. It was harder now, rough, defiant. Black people loved her for it. They had always loved her. But now, as they sat at lunch counters demanding to be served, rode buses demanding to be seated, marched demanding good jobs for good pay, they knew how much she truly loved them. The white backlash, however, was swift and fierce. People smashed her records and threatened her life. So Nina sang louder, her voice as steady as the beat of that relentless drum. And when that drum beat sounded on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, black people looked at Nina to ease their pain. "What will happen," she sang, "now that the King of Love is dead?" Nina Simone sang the whole story of Black America for everyone to hear. Her voice resounded with the love, joy, and power of it all. And when she sang of black children, "You lovely, precious dreams," her voice sounded like hope. And that is the end of this story. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's read aloud, and I really do hope that it inspired you to use your gifts to speak truth, to share truth, and to make a difference in this world. Until we read again, take care.